Welcome to the webinar today, The Art and Magic of Editorial Retouching. In just a few moments, I'll be joined by Gemma, editorial lead photographer at Amazon, and Leighann, customer success manager and retoucher at Pixelz. Before we welcome them to stage, I'm just going to run through a few key details to get us all involved and enjoying the webinar today. As you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, we've got a few tabs over there. You can feel free to jump into the chat. It looks like we've got a lot of people already in there saying hello. Yes, please say hi. And then we've also got the Q&A tab, and we're going to really want to use that Q&A tab for any questions you have throughout the webinar, and that way we can be sure that we answer the webinar or answer your question here on the webinar, or we can write to you right there in the Q&A section. And as some of you may see, there's also emoji opportunities and GIF/GIF. Oh, look at Alexandra showing us how to use that. And if someone wants to tell me how to pronounce that, that would be great. And I think that's all the Q&A we have, or all of the details we have today. And of course, as always, you'll get a recap email after the webinar with a link to the recording. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and welcome Leighann and Gemma to the stage. All right, hello.
Hello.
Hi, how are you ladies today?
Doing great, thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. So to start us off, Gemma and Leighann, could you introduce yourselves real quick to everyone watching today?
Should I start since you mentioned my name first? Hi, I'm Gemma. I'm the lead photographer at Amazon Studio in Barcelona. I joined the team right when they opened the studio 4 years ago. And previously, I spent 25 years in the US working as a freelance photographer, mainly doing editorial. And then I moved back here and where I was born. So happy to join and happy to answer any questions, doubts, or comments.
Thank you for joining us. Leighann?
And hi, I'm Leighann. I am a customer success director or manager at Pixelz. I previously have been in retouching for 10 plus years, starting in e-com and then kind of evolving into high-end editorial work and visual effects work, primarily in New York, but now I currently live in Portland, Oregon with my family.
Thank you, guys. And yeah, to get to know everyone out there that's watching right now, if you could respond with an emoji, we want to know, are you a photographer? Are you a retoucher? Or are you in the industry and just here to learn? So if you're a photographer, send us a little camera emoji. If you're a retoucher, send us a pencil emoji. And if you're just here to hang out, learn, and are into the industry, send us a little high five hand emoji. Oh, look at that. We've got someone already. Perfect. And while we're waiting for you to respond in there, let's kick it off. So the first thing I really wanted to ask both of you was, what defines an editorial photo or photo shoot? What makes it different from anything else?
You know, when I was thinking about this, I think, you know, you can start by defining it by production value, the art direction, your intent of use. But when I think about this visually, it's a piece of art, or it's a narrative telling a story. There could be, you know, a commercial agenda behind that. The other thing I would think of is like, I know that I'm viewing a certain photographer's work. They're telling us a story through their perspective, their lighting. You can kind of see those through lines, you know, whether it's a spread or a billboard or, you know, something like that.
Yeah, I'm completely agreeing with Leighann. It's basically, it's a team effort to kind of like show or express a story rather than, you know, selling a brand. And as she mentioned, sometimes there's a subliminal message to sell a brand, but in theory, it's just conveying a story and telling a story through some imagery.
And while we're sort of discussing what is editorial right now, just in case anyone's curious about like what that looks like to you. Is there a piece of editorial work that always stands out in your mind, that's your favorite or just that you love?
Yeah, for me, it's like one of the ones that always pops up for me is like Stephen Klein's work. There was a photo shoot in W Magazine many years ago called Domestic Bliss. I think it was at the start of the Brangelina saga, so it kind of was like a foreboding tale in my view.
I did, we did discuss some different work when we were talking earlier, so I did have to go take a look at that work, and it is really good. I do remember when that came out. I just forgot about it. Gemma, what about you? Any piece of editorial work that stands out?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this work from Thais Sirote, who, and I expressed this on this forum because it's a campaign she did for Cactus magazine, and it's a lot of retouch involved. It's basically fashion accessories, which I'm very familiar with, and you can see, there is, it's not just a straight photo, but there's a lot of retouch. Not, I mean, knowing it, but it's very well done. So I thought it would be a good example.
Yeah, we'll make sure to share all of that with everyone in the chat, and then feel free to drop your favorite piece of editorial work that really stands out to you. So when we get into setting up an editorial shoot with photographer, retoucher, what makes up a perfect brief when you're the photographer and when you're post-production to make sure that vision comes to life? Should we start with the photographer, Gemma?
Yeah. So to me, the perfect brief it's a combination of mood board, communication. Basically, it's art direction comes with the idea, and then it's translated to the photographer and the whole team. And I'll express this several times on this forum, but communication is the key to make the project successful. Because if there's not good communication, then there's missing links here and there, and then there's blockers. So I think it's a good communication all across. It's something that it's very needed.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, a mood board is always great. And then other than that, just like a brief on what's the goal of the shoot aesthetically, what we're trying to kind of like goal towards, whether it's, in camera or in post.
And what about details? Are there any specific details that make it easier in this communication between photographer and retoucher, especially with editorial?
I'll say the more specific, the better. You can be even over specific. I mean, the more details you give, the more input each other receive. So again, communication and to me, there's no over communication. It needs to be constant, and every detail counts. Leighann, what do you think?
And yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's never a time in which you are not given enough information. I think other than that, we speak a visual language, so visuals are always extremely helpful.
And so we've talked about communication being very, very important. Is there anything specific that helps you build that rapport between post-production, retoucher, and photographer that lets you have that trust and open communication?
For me, a lot of the times I feel like this is just like a gradual process. You're working together, you find that you kind of just click well, and then you kind of like, let's repeat this, this relationship as much as possible. It's, working with a specific crew, whether it's video production or photo shoots, like that happens. You'll see those crews kind of stick together for as long as possible. Other than that, as a retoucher, the best thing that you can do is kind of translate what that photographer's voice is, and without ever really being visible. Like you are executing something without the seams showing, and that's like the biggest trust point, I think, from my perspective.
Completely agreed. It's and it's over time. It's like with any relationship, the more you work with this person, the more you know each other, and you know the needs from each other, and the way to speak. Even there's a language, so I think it's over time, and it's true. You work well with somebody, and you want to stick with this team. I always think of dream teams of people that you. Sometimes it doesn't happen. When it happens, it's great, and you can trust this person, and you can trust the team to do a great, amazing job. And it's a team effort at the end of the day. It's not just the photographer; it's everybody involved, from the very beginning to the last, retouch.
And I'm going to ask this question to both of you, but I'm also going to ask it to everyone out there, because I can see that we have a lot of people that have put both the pencil emoji and the camera emoji, meaning that they are both a photographer and retoucher. So my question to everybody is, how important do you think it is that if you are a retoucher, that you have been a photographer or understand certain depths of what it means to be a photographer, and vice versa? As a photographer, how important is it for you to know certain aspects of retouching? I'll free for all, whoever would like it first. Gemma?
I'll let. Oh, okay. I was going to let Leighann. I think it's for a photographer. It's not. I mean, basic retouching is good to know, but if I knew everything, I wouldn't be a photographer. I would be a retoucher. So I think it's important for both retoucher and photographer to speak the same language. Visuals, as Leighann said, are very important, and I think it's all related in a way. But it helps if the retoucher knows about photography more than the photographer knowing retouching.
Yeah, excuse me. I would agree. And I think a really important distinction to make is, like, retoucher isn't a graphic designer, where we started in photography. Like, that was our draw to this, and kind of how our base language is formed. So, I think it's essential for a retoucher to understand photography. Maybe they don't understand every single aspect of it in the same in depth, just like a photographer wouldn't understand everything in retouching in depth. But, we have to understand lighting, how that affects the image, much more like a painter would, because that's what you're enhancing, essentially. You're not really like manipulating an image in like a graphic way, so it's really it's a hand-in-hand relationship. That being said, I know that any photographer that does retouching, it makes them stronger in photography. It's kind of like they're seeing the image as a whole, they're seeing those details. That's really really important. But it's a retoucher's job to kind of translate that vision too.
On that note, I want to jump down to a question we have here about when and how should like a retoucher get involved in the process?
To me, a retoucher, ideally, it would be great if she or he knows the project from the beginning, from stage one. So he or she knows what the project is about, what it needs to convey, what's the story. So that way they understand the whole project, and they know where we're going with it. Afterwards, after the images are shot, then yes, there's total involvement from the retoucher, but ideally, it would be good that the retoucher is involved in the in all the communication station. No, maybe not all but just to understand the whole, project.
I think it's also important for, a retoucher to be involved from the beginning because then if there's input or if they can call out things that would help them, they can advise what would happen on set. Hey, we need a clean backdrop with no models just in case I have to put a plate, like it kind of gives them the ability to inject what would be really helpful to achieve those goals at the end. Sometimes that doesn't, you don't get to voice those requests, and then you just really do have to make magic out of nothing. But yeah, if the more input you can have from the beginning, the more open communication, it helps the process evolve so much better.
Yeah, no, I imagine that this would be a bit different from, this is one of the areas where we're going to see a big difference in maybe like e-com, where, if you're shooting, products on model, it's not as big of an issue to be involved in every step versus editorial, which brings me to my next question of, in an ideal world with an editorial photo shoot, should the retoucher be on set? Ideal world.
Yeah, sure. Like, yeah, anywhere you can be involved in the process, but I'll also, there's always the possibility of too many cooks in the kitchen on production. I think if anything, a retoucher's largely going to be an observer. They might be able to help with things like, or support things with like, oh, if you styled this or pulled something, like this would be helpful, especially some materials, or, you just kind of understand when looking at something what will happen when it gets to your plate. So you kind of, that's, if anything, it would just be to alleviate the work and make it so that you can translate all that and not have to be burdened with some of the more detailed tasks. So.
Yeah, and I want to add this because in an ideal world, yeah, it would be perfect that we have the retoucher with us, and also for time's sake, because as we shoot, it's good to have a retoucher right there. If there's any questions, they can ask them right away. If we have some input coming from the retoucher, or we have to give it, since they've seen the set, it's for the workflow. Sometimes it's faster. It not always happens that we have the retouchers with us, but in the ideal world, it would be nice.
Yeah, I'm also very curious out there in the chat, your thoughts on this as photographers and retouchers that you are. Do you give us a thumbs up if you think the ideal world would mean a retoucher is on set? Do we have anyone? All right, they're thinking about it while we move on to the next question. Are there certain parts of the process where like a retoucher or photographer should just be left out, like in the beginning stages, pre-production, during the shoot, and then, for Leighann, to you to answer this question, at some point in the post-production process, should a photographer just be left out? No one wants to answer.
I think once you have final selects, I think round one, there's so much file prep, there's so much that has to kind of be prepped in that photograph or that series. So I don't think that that's necessary for a photographer to be kind of included in. And then once that's done and you kind of get into the more creative work and then you get into the subsequent rounds, that can be really helpful to kind of have that open dialogue again.
I agree. I mean, no, I'm very open to everybody doing their job, and then after that, it's a feedback. Again, a dialogue. So not only the retoucher, the art director, the stylist, anybody, they do their job, and then we come together, and then we discuss, and then we can have the feedback. But everybody needs to do their job at their time and not their own, space.
And I think we've kind of circled back to this idea, Gemma, that you've brought up, letting people do the work that they've been entrusted with. And I want to jump to one of the questions that we've gotten in the Q&A here, that Chris has said, just like photographer covers a huge gamut of genres and styles, I feel retoucher also spans a gamut of techniques and skills. If you haven't found your teammate, how do you suggest vetting retouchers? So if you're looking to add a retoucher to your team, what are you looking for?
I look for somebody who has experience, because I had experiences with people who hasn't had experience, and it shows. And just somebody who knows how to listen, how to understand the message, and if they don't understand, they can ask questions. I mean, the more questions they ask, the better. And somebody who's open to a dialogue, and not imposing their ideas. Me as a photographer, I'm very open to anybody in the team to give me their inputs, because again, this is a team effort. So I look for somebody who's open-minded, and who can listen to our needs, and also give us their expertise.
Leighann, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that was a great answer. I I think other than that, word of mouth is always helpful. This community is still relatively tight knit. I think most people have worked with someone at some point in time, or understand that. I certainly have, not necessarily with an individual photographer, but with post-production companies, taken retouching tests, just showing in a live, more or less setting, what you can do with kind of what they generally would work with. That's not an uncommon practice.
Yeah, it keeps coming back to communication, trust, community, which I think is something that we didn't really talk about before. I want to circle back, now that we answered Chris's question, circle back to the process of between photographer and retoucher, and what are the main pain points of editorial post-production in particular?
I would say, there can always be, we already know, lots of communication. Sometimes if there's a lack thereof, or if, you don't, if you didn't have that trust and someone wasn't able to voice what they needed in that process, sometimes the work can pile up. That is, one of the truths about this job, or a visual effects artist, or anything. It's like everything, we're kind of like that last touch point on that image. So before it goes to press, or if it's posted online, we're kind of that last filter. So that can kind of pile up on us. Other than that, there can be maybe injections of opinions that are not really necessary. I've had the chain of a production coordinator, art director, then the director, too many opinions, and then they can be contradictory. So that you're kind of just chasing whose opinion is right, or what's the right path to take.
And is there anything there that you think are any of those pain points easily fixable by building a certain type of rapport or relationship with the photographer, getting a certain type of brief?
I mean, I think Gemma says best. It's communication. So you
Yeah,
just gotta.
I wanted to add one point that it's included maybe in what you mentioned. It's time. Time is also a pain point because it's, as Leighann knows, you can spend hours retouching, and if you don't have a deadline or you don't know what the project needs to, if there's a time limit, the retoucher should know, because then she or he can work more or less, or so that can be also a blocker sometimes. Again, if communication is not given and they don't know, and I'm sorry, I keep insisting on this, but it's a relationship. So dialogue is important.
Yeah, I would say that's a really helpful add-on. Anytime I'm given like a clear directive of like a timestamp, like you should only be spending this amount of time on an image, that could be really helpful to determine how far I'm going to go with any, and that may just be allocated to a round 1 or a round 2. It's like, hey, you only need to be spending 20 minutes on this because we're going to be having that dialogue. So we want, we just kind of want to make moves, and then we're going to look at it, make more moves, pull back, whatever. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I don't know those retouchers out there. I don't know how common it is that time is put in the brief, but I think that's an excellent point, something to think about. I am going to ask you guys one more question before we turn it over to questions from anyone that's watching. So if you have any questions, start dropping them in the Q&A tab and I'll get to it, and we will get to it. The last question I wanted to end on, though, is how much do current trends affect photography and retouching? How much do you feel it in your job?
I feel like, since I started, there has been a pretty dramatic shift. Basically, when I was starting retouching, it was still like super perfectionist. Like models had to be a certain aesthetic. And I think like the Dove Real Beauty campaign was like a really huge, like a landmark campaign, especially in this country. But with social media, with all these different, everyone has more input now. So I think it's really like we're changing the narrative of what we want to see. And I think people want to see themselves reflected back in these artful images and these lifestyle. It's like the lifestyle is everyone. So people want to kind of see themselves in it. So pulling back a more naturalistic approach. And if it's, that it's also great because then it leaves more room for the actual creative aspect. You're working more in the art aspect of that image versus the tedium of smoothing skin to, a Barbie like look, so.
Gemma, what do you think?
From somebody who started shooting analog, you can imagine that the trends have changed, especially. So I lived the retouching from the very beginning, and it's really it has changed, and for good, because it's what Leighann was saying. Now we're going through a more natural look. It was realistic now before, but now I think it's more realistic now to make it more natural, more the way we see things, and I think it's a better way to relate to the public, to whoever is looking at the editorial.
And does that change the way you shoot at all, Gemma, when has that had any impact now that retouching has taken on a more natural take or aesthetic?
Of my way of shooting? Not really. I mean, my way of shooting depends on really what I'm shooting. If it's for editorial, if it's a campaign, if it's an ad campaign, if it's e-commerce, that's when I change. In terms of retouching, when I do an editorial, I keep in mind what I'm expected to be retouched. So when I'm shooting, yes, I am aware while I'm shooting that maybe I need to shoot a plate for the retoucher to have. I mean, I'm very aware because I work with a lot of retouchers, so it's good to keep them in mind. Unfortunately, when they're not on set. Yeah.
One day that you'll get that ideal.
To speak up, yeah.
All right, we are going to transition to the Q&As from everybody out there. First question we've got is from Peter. He asks, what tools are you using to streamline communication and creative direction between a photographer and retoucher? Do you have any tools that you've used in your days of retouching, Leighann?
I mean, I think our most common is, a PDF markup. Everyone's familiar with this. It's a standard for a reason. Everyone kind of has access to it. It's very clear. It's separate from the image, so you're able to utilize the image without interrupting anything on the actual live image itself. There are a multitude of different tools that people use for communication. I think like the pioneering of something like a Slack, it's great because you can drop live images, you can communicate like it's an AOL instant messenger. You can kind of recreate that rapport with people when you're not directly with them. And then, there's just like infinitely more similar tools like that.
So Slack may be the way to build the rapport, and then PDF is the way to actually communicate about the work.
Yeah, traditionally, I would say, and I think we're kind of evolving in that too. So there's I think a lot of ways that's going to get bridged going forward.
Gemma, anything you use?
Yeah, no, I use the same. We use Slack and then the PDF, and yeah, same thing.
Straightforward tools. Yeah, and of course, if anyone is using anything different and wants to suggest it to everyone here watching, drop it in the chat there. All right, the next question from Pablo. How do you see AI generated images affecting editorial photography and retouching?
This is a hot topic. Yeah, I don't know. I think if the experience is limited to the Instagram pictures that we've seen that are AI generated, I don't know. I think I think it's a difficult question because you're taking something that sure is informed by everything that it's absorbing, on the internet, essentially. But it's removing the human aspect. I don't know how much control there is over that. I personally haven't interfaced with those. I think it's difficult when you're an artist to kind of, to appreciate it sometimes. But I think it's also at a certain point, we're going to have to learn to work within that and see where it can support us, rather than being wholly resistant to it. So it's going to be, I'm sure it'll be it'll evolve over time and we'll see how it seeps in, but yeah, it's a tough one. I'm not sure how it's actually going to pan out though. But that being said, it's like the human touch is important. That's what makes us, different. We have perspectives, I don't know that I would believe that an AI is going to form its own perspective the way a human would. So.
Completely agree. It's a little scary, but it's there. It's there, and I don't think we can just ignore it because it's going to be part of our lives. Again, if we can incorporate somehow the human input or I don't know, just the human. I know artificial intelligence doesn't go with human, but there's hopefully there'll be a way that we can connect them both and see how it happens. But it's definitely, it's here, and we need to keep up with it. It's not here 100%, and not, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot to develop, but it's something to explore and to see how it's going to be implemented. I see it more in commercial than editorials. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I think we are seeing a push of also CGI created images, and but I think what you both said is very interesting. Of at some point we have to stop fighting it and start figuring out how to work with it, and does it fit in, and how does it fit in? As someone just put in the chat, for retouching stuff, AI is great, and I mean, right, you know, I'm gonna hard agree with that one. That AI can help with certain, again, it's learning how to work with it and how to integrate it right into what we do. But I do think editorial is still, in my mind, a question mark, right? How does it fit in with editorial in terms of creating the images? Let's I think we have time for one more quick question. Let's see if we have we have some more questions about AI. So let me take this question real quick about film photography, so analog photography. So how important is shooting on film and scanning? I've heard about photographers like Jamie Hawksworth, Quentin DeBrye, excuse my pronunciation. So, they sometimes use this process. I mean, that film shooting mindset improving the shooting general quality. Any thoughts on this? So I believe they're asking of if you think that the mindset in shooting analog improves the general quality of an image.
I tend to agree, because I started with analog. So the fact that I started shooting analog, it gave me a perspective on color temperature, lighting. It's something that now it's very easy to change on the computer digitally, but before, either you got it on the take, or you couldn't. I mean, at the lab, maybe you could process you know, a little bit of exposure less, but I think I mean, I see some assistants that come and work with me, and they don't even look through the viewfinder. It's all through the screen. And to me, well, I'm telling my age now, but it's important. I think analog, it's something that we shouldn't forget, because it really gives you an understanding of lighting, color, many things that digitally, where it's the immediately. You have it, you fix it, and that's it. And there's beauty on digital work, but I think, to me, even like students, they should learn analog first. I would say that in schools, just teach the analog way, and then they can go into digital, because it's a good way to learn, especially lighting and color temperature and composition. It's a different thing, because you can do it digitally or not, but especially lighting and color temperature, it's not an easy thing to learn.
Yeah. Leighann, anything to add?
I wholeheartedly agree. I also started shooting on film and processing my own negatives. I think, especially in an education setting, it's basically, digital is amazing. It's opened the door and infinite ways of what we can do. I think the difference with shooting on film, you might only have a single frame. You have 24 frames. You have a limitation, so you're forced to slow down. You're forced to think about what you're doing. You're looking through the viewfinder. You're looking for that right light. It kind of is the inverse of what learning how to retouch would do. It's, you know, you're still training your eye towards something. And you're kind of forced within a parameter. I think those constraints can be really, really educational. And, you know, yeah, I mean, in terms of like the quality of the image, you know, you can get a super high resolution digital image, you know, with a basic camera, which is amazing, but the process that you have to kind of utilize in film is really beautiful. And I think, you know, we've seen like we can get incredibly huge, highly detailed, beautiful images with film, and that's never to be ignored.
And I think that is the perfect place to end. We full circled all the way from AI to analog photography, which is kind of amazing. And I'm glad we can end it there on analog. So I just want to say a really big thank you to both Gemma and Leighann for coming and talking about all things editorial and what this process is. And thank you for everyone for joining us, engaging, asking questions. And we'll see you next time on our next webinar. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.